Shalom alaikum and welcome back to another Chat Languages video. My name is Yair and today I want to talk about the Aramaic language. However, there is no such thing as Aramaic. So, what do I mean? Well, the biggest misconception about Aramaic is that it's all one language. However, it's rather a collection of several different languages from different periods of time used by different communities. And that is what I want to discuss today. When I say the word Aramaic, you might think of the Judeo language found in the Talmud, the Christian language found in the Syriac Peshitta, or your first thought might be the Neo-Aramaic languages still spoken today in pockets of Syria and Iraq, or perhaps the first thing you might think of is the ancient lingua franca of the Middle East. However, I want to highlight that all these varieties naively grouped together as being simply Aramaic are very different from one another. So I hope this video will be able to demonstrate some of the differences within what I like to call the Aramaic languages. Yalla, bo natril. So to begin, let's cover a very brief, abridged history of Aramaic. Before discussing the language, we have to ask where the term Aramaic comes from. Aramaic is simply the language of the Arameans, an ancient nomadic people in the Middle East. However, after the Bronze Age collapse, the Arameans gradually created city-states, first in the west and later in the east. Aramaic became an important language of trade and a common vernacular across this area. The Arameans filled the void left behind from the Hittites, whose language and culture quickly lost significance in the region. This stage of the language is called Ancient Aramaic, and there isn't too much recorded from this period compared to others. However, Aramaic wouldn't become truly that important until the Neo-Assyrian Empire conquered the entire Fertile Crescent. Although the official language of the state and administration was Akkadian, the majority of people in the empire were now speakers of Aramaic. Given that Akkadian was an ancient language already on its way out, and that many Aramaic speakers migrated east into Mesopotamia after the conquest, the Neo-Assyrians soon made Aramaic an additional official language due to its importance in trade and vernacular matters. This stage of Aramaic is known as Imperial Aramaic, and the language would eventually replace Akkadian entirely. That's the equivalent of if the Romans conquered Greece and eventually ended up adopting Greek as their official language. Oh, wait. This same time is when the Babylonian Exile took place, which is when the Jewish people were exiled in the Galut in Babylon from around 597 BCE. In exile away from the temple, scholarly Judaism began to significantly develop. Aramaic began to influence Hebrew around this time, particularly in adopting the Imperial Aramaic script, which would be modified over time to the modern Hebrew script. Aramaic also began to slowly replace Hebrew as the main vernacular language of the Jewish people. This is the reason that two of the books of the Bible, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Daniel, as well as one verse in the book of Jeremiah and a couple of isolated phrases elsewhere in the Bible, are written in Aramaic rather than Hebrew. The Aramaic found in the Tanakh is often simply referred to as Biblical Aramaic, and is one of the most commonly studied varieties of Aramaic. Biblical Aramaic is based on the Aramaic from around the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE. However, within Jewish tradition, there is also Targumic Aramaic, based on 1st century CE Aramaic, the language of the Targumim. And of course, the most commonly studied variety of Aramaic in the Jewish community, Jewish Babylonian Aramaic, the language of the Babylonian Talmud, particularly the Gemara. Some of the more attentive viewers might ask, what is the language of the Jerusalem Talmud? Well, that would be Jewish Palestinian Aramaic. I must note here that Palestinian in this context academically refers to Eretz Israel, as no such country known as Palestine ever existed, let alone a Palestinian people, a very recent invention based on a Roman term for Israel. It purely refers to the geographical region, as the Talmud Yerushalmi was written in the Roman province of Syria Palestina. So what separates Babylonian and Palestinian Judeo-Aramaic? Well, by this point in time, a west-east distinction had developed within Aramaic, a distinction made by observing both grammatical and phonological differences. Western Aramaic is of particular interest to Christians, as it would have been the native language of Jesus, the Christian Messiah. If you're interested in some of the differences between Western and Eastern Aramaic, I refer you to this video in the corner. Talking of Christians, Aramaic is an important language in their tradition too. The New Testament, although written in Greek, contains a few Aramaic sentences, particularly in the Galilean dialect of Jesus. The most famous example is Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is actually drawn from a Hebrew phrase in Tehillim 22, Eli, Eli, lama azavtani. This is believed to be a regional pronunciation of Galilean Hebrew, as in the Gospel of Matthew, the same quote appears in the Greek transliteration as Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which would be a more standard form for the Aramaic of the time. A complete translation of the Bible, both Old and New Testament, into Aramaic was made between the 2nd to 5th centuries CE. The Aramaic used in this translation, known as the Syriac Peshitta, is referred to as Classical Syriac and is the holy language of many Eastern Christians, used in the Syriac Church as well as being used by other Eastern Christians such as the Maronites and the Assyrians. Classical Syriac as a literary language is somewhere between Biblical and Targumic Aramaic in the Jewish tradition, and as long as he can read the Syriac script, a Jew knowledgeable in the Aramaic of the Targumim, or the Book of Daniel, should have no problem reading the Syriac Peshitta. There are some very small differences between them, and I highly recommend this video again for more information. Of course, not everyone during this time was a Jew or Christian. Classical Mandaic, one of the only Aramaic languages not commonly referred to as Aramaic, arose during this period. Also, some other dialects used across the Middle East developed, such as Nabatean Aramaic, which was mixed heavily with Nabatean and looks like a mix between Aramaic and Old Arabic. Palmyrene Aramaic, used in the city-state of Palmyra, which used a script that was a predecessor to the Syriac Estrangelis script, was also used as an administrative language, and additionally, Azamic was used as another administrative language in the southern Caucasus at one point in time, though there's not much evidence that it was widely spoken. Moving into the Middle Ages, even after the Arab colonization of the Middle East, Aramaic persisted for a long time, especially amongst Christian communities who held Aramaic as a language of religious significance to them. For quite a few centuries after the Arab conquest, it was still common to find Aramaic-speaking peoples across the entire Middle East, and certain dialects had developed, such as Lebanese Aramaic, which only went extinct in the 19th century, and Samaritan Aramaic, both Western Aramaic varieties. However, centuries of assimilation caused Arabic to absorb these languages, just as Aramaic had originally absorbed Akkadian. Levantine Arabic today still has a strong Western Aramaic substrate, especially Lebanese, the Arabic language of Lebanon. In a video I made not long ago about lesser-known Semitic languages, I noted that Syrian, spoken in Ma'lula, Baqa, and Gubba'ud in southwestern Syria, is the last surviving Aramaic language. The remainder of the Neo-Aramaic languages are all within the Eastern Aramaic group. This brings us to today. The Neo-Aramaic languages, as they're often called, are still sometimes mistaken for being one solitary language, but in reality it is several different dialect groups. There are two main kinds of Neo-Aramaic, the judeo-Neo-Aramaic languages and the Christian Neo-Aramaic languages. This map here specifically shows the judeo-Neo-Aramaic languages before 1948, when the Jews were ethnically cleansed from these areas, whereas this map shows the situation of the Neo-Aramaic languages today spoken by Christian communities, notably the Assyrians and the Chaldeans. The Hulaula language in Iran is still spoken by Jewish communities that exist there. However, the rest of the Judeo-Neo-Aramaic languages all exist in Israel, spoken by elderly speakers and risk extinction. En revanche, Tuyoyo and Suret, the two main Aramaic languages spoken in Syria and Iraq respectively, seem to actually thrive. Tuyoyo speakers, who often call it Surite, are mostly Syrians and adherents to Syriac Christianity, whereas Suret, also known as Assyrian Neo-Aramaic, Atoraya, or simply just Assyrian, is spoken by adherents of the Assyrian Church of the East and the Chaldean Catholic Church in Iraq. Specifically, the Nineveh Plains region, where many Assyrians call for an autonomous or even sometimes independent Assyrian state in Iraq. The other main Neo-Aramaic language is Neo-Mandaic, which is the modern variety of classical Mandaic used by the Mandaean people, nowadays mostly in Iran, but historically in southern Iraq. There are still many more technical distinctions to note, such as the fact that both Christian and Judeo varieties of Neo-Aramaic, once spoken in the same place, can sometimes be completely unintelligible to one another, and that some other niche Aramaic varieties existed, such as a Neo-Aramaic language that went extinct only in 1999 called Mlahso. But I think it's time to display the differences between some of these Aramaic languages. One big difference that should let you know which Aramaic you're looking at is the script. Several different scripts have been used over the millennia for Aramaic, but if you see the Hebrew script, which, as I have mentioned before, is originally Aramaic in origin, this should let you know that it's a Judeo-Aramaic language. If you see the Syriac script, of which there are these three varieties, Estrangela, Serta, and Madnahaya, it's probably a Christian Aramaic language. If it looks like this, then it's Mandaic. If you see any other script, it's likely from ancient times and could possibly be Nabatean Aramaic, Imperial Aramaic, Ancient Aramaic, or Palmyrene Aramaic, as well as possibly Arzamic. Another indicator can be vowel placement. Now, this is only something that you will gain an intuition for if you study an Aramaic language, but let's take a look at the word for peace, which is shlama, related to Hebrew shalom. In classical Syriac, Biblical Aramaic, and Jewish Babylonian Aramaic, this word would indeed be shlama. However, vowel shifts over time have led to the long a becoming an o. Thus, the same word in most Neo-Aramaic languages is often Shlomo, which is of no particular relation to the stereotypical Jewish name other than the root. Another example is Shin and Samech sometimes becoming Tav. Now, this shift already happened to a certain extent in ancient Aramaic. For example, you can compare Hebrew and Aramaic words like shor and tur, meaning bull. But this sound shift happened further, which is why the language traditionally called Soryaya is today referred to as Toreyo. Similarly, the word Ashur for Assyria today in Suret is referred to as Atur. Another distinguishing feature is the presence of many, quote, foreign sounds. Neo-Aramaic languages will contain sounds like ch and j in loanwords, or even in core vocabulary due to foreign influence over time, particularly from Arabic and Kurdish. However, you will never find these sounds in older stages of Aramaic such as Biblical Aramaic, Classical Syriac, or Imperial Aramaic, and there was not a way of transcribing them available at the time. Aside from just sounds, Neo-Aramaic languages are much more likely to contain many loanwords from Arabic, Kurdish, Turkish, Persian, or other languages such as English and French due to centuries of being surrounded by these different languages and the fact that most speakers of Neo-Aramaic languages are also bilingual with Arabic and sometimes Sorani Kurdish in Iraq, unless they live in the diaspora. Whilst on the topic of phonology, the traditional phonology for ancient Aramaic looked something like this, although, of course, it differed between dialects. If you watched my last video, you may be aware of sparanatization called beged KEFET in Hebrew and Aramaic. This is a feature of Hebrew and Aramaic which is pretty unique where certain consonants have alternate forms depending on where they occur in a word. However, I had some comments complaining that beged KEFET sparanatization did not exist in true biblical Hebrew and that it was a later addition into Tiberian vocalization due to Aramaic influence on Hebrew. Now, this is a debate in Hebrew linguistics, but it is possible, as Aramaic did influence biblical Hebrew phonology as it became the main language of the Jewish people over time, and it influenced grammar and vocabulary too, so there is no reason that beged KEFET may have been an Aramaic feature imposed on Hebrew. One of the main arguments for this is the fact that Samaritan Hebrew never underwent this shift, and still today the Samaritan pronunciation of Hebrew pronounces every bet and kaf like be and ka, respectively. However, the Samaritans also spoke Aramaic at some point, with Samaritan Aramaic being its own recognized dialect, so it's unfair to use the Samaritans as proof for biblical Hebrew not having beged KEFET sparanatization. Finally, I'd like to provide some samples, specifically from Biblical Aramaic, Targumic Aramaic, and then Jewish Babylonian Aramaic. The first sample is from Daniel 2:12-4 and reads as the following, with a translation below. Kol kavel dana malka, banas uktsaf, sagi va'amar lehovada, lehol hakimei Bavel, ve'datha nefkat va'hakimaya mithkatlin, uva'u Daniel ve'havrohi lehithkatlala, be'edain Daniel hethiv ata ut'im la'arioch, Ravta Bahaya, di Malka, di Nafak, di Katala, lehakimei Bavel. The next sample is Targumic Aramaic, being the first 3 verses of Genesis, or Bereshit in Hebrew. As someone who understands Biblical Hebrew, I actually find this very easy to understand for the most part. Bekadmin bra Shema, Yath Shamaya va Yath Ara'a, ve'ara'a havath tzadya, ve'rekanya, ve'hashocha, pras al apei tehoma, ve'ruha min qadam, shema manahsh va al apei maya, ve'amar shema, yehi nahora, ve'hava nehora. Finally, we have Jewish Babylonian Aramaic. It is believed in the Babylonian dialect the Beged KEFET sparanization had reduced to what we see in modern Hebrew, meaning that Taf, Gimel, and Dalet were not sparanized. It sounds like the following verse from the Talmud. Mai avanim shehem tzaka, achat argimu, evnei da'achpa, ola amar avanim hasdorot legader, veha tenei rav hiya, avanim dzvorot legader, tni storot, achat agimu, avnei da'achpa, larabi meir, dim taktan, af algav, de la mahatan, larabanan, hu da mahatan, ul'ula da amar, avanim hastorot lagader larabi meir, dim taknan, af algav de la sideiran larabanan. I do apologize for any pronunciation mistakes or areas where I seem to struggle reading it. I'm not an expert in Aramaic, but I have spent some time studying it and I'm aware of its phonology. I'd also like to provide an example of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Suret, also known as Assyrian Neo-Aramaic. This Aramaic is different from the Aramaic I know from Jewish texts, and this is good evidence to show that this is not the same language. I will not try reading it out as my pronunciation will be just simply terrible. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I think it is more appropriate to view Aramaic as a collection of languages rather than one language. I've created this graph displaying the various Aramaic languages. Those in blue are languages that are still living, those in yellow are still studied or used in liturgical practices but not spoken on a daily basis, and those in red are dead or extinct. I wish more could be done to revitalize and prevent the death of more Aramaic languages at the hands of Arabic, as they are languages with a deep history in the Fertile Crescent, and quite extraordinarily. Aramaean Christians in northern Israel, notably in the town of Gush Chalav, are teaching Syriac at schools, hoping to revive it as a spoken language. Similarly, there are movements to revitalize and save Judeo-Neo-Aramaic languages in Israel, such as Lishan Didan, and some people in Lebanon appear to be trying to bring back Lebanese Aramaic, although I can't find any solid information on their movement. I hope these movements are all successful. However, I've spoken enough on this subject, and now I think it's time to end the video here. Before I finish the video, I have an announcement to make. I make these videos for fun and because I have a passion for languages and linguistics. However, I don't make a lot of money from the revenue, and like everyone, I have to pay rent. So that's why I finally want to introduce you all to the new channel membership program, or Friends of the Channel, as I like to call them. The perks to becoming a friend of the channel includes the standard loyalty badges and emojis provided by YouTube. However, I'm not too imaginative when it comes to the custom emojis. So anyone who becomes a member, I will give you the opportunity to create and submit your own emoji that will be added to the list available for channel members. Additionally though, you will receive early access to videos on a Tuesday evening as opposed to a Friday evening. You will gain access to all of my older videos that are currently private, and I will make occasional members only videos. However, these will be shorter than usual and focused on requested topics that I usually wouldn't be able to justify making a full video on. I will also be reviving the Discord server, although it will be a new server however. I'm a lot more active on Discord these days, and members will have the opportunity to speak directly with me on the server. And naturally, I will include member shoutouts at the end of each video. I didn't want to think only about profit, so I created one single tier so that all members are the same, and I introduced a lot of available features that most channels would not usually be so generous with. All this for the price of £3.99 a month, which is roughly $5 for my American viewers. I appreciate not everybody will be in the position to buy channel membership, so the usual public videos will continue to be made every 2 weeks as usual. The upload date is changing to Friday, but everything else is the same. If you can't buy channel membership but do want to do something to support my channel, simply subscribing definitely helps, and let other people know about my videos. It's all appreciated very much. Of course, I would appreciate it a lot if someone did become a friend of the channel, but there's honestly no pressure. Thank you for listening to my announcement, but now I will conclude the video here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video enlightened you about the Aramaic languages. If there are any Aramaic speakers here, please feel free to let me know what you think in the comments down below. Anyway, thank you once again, and until next time, Toda rabba, vayalla bye.